for deep focus for my mutual funds course. So back, relax, and enjoy the study session. And as always, I'm gonna have a poll. I'm gonna go and get my MacBook and let's study. Be right back. Morning. Gonna use these for binaural beats. Yo, what's going on? See you. Good morning, live a life. Welcome. Hit subscribe if you guys are new here. I'm studying my course right now, mutual funds course. Hang on. Just bringing it up right now. I want to get an hour in before work. I'll flip my meditations to the evening for now, just until I get this course done. I'm halfway through with my reading, and then I want to practice the quizzes later. Just bringing up the textbook. Oh, how about now? How about now? Yeah. Hang on. Welcome, welcome. Malaria, welcome. Here we go. Here's mutual funds. I melt until my book studies. Yeah, I hear ya. Here we go. I'm way down here. Yeah, right here. Let's just get to I'm new here. Can you just tell me let me know what's going on? Yeah. So I'm doing some studying for my mutual fund course. And again, my channel's mainly mind, body, soul optimization, but I want to show you guys behind the scenes of when I'm working on stuff. Um, Yesterday I was doing yard work, but I want to get an hour in of studying basically, or just under an hour. So I got to do some chapter reading, and this is to help get me back into banking. So that's what I'm working towards. My background for my career is in finance. I was in banking, then I was in insurance. Now, yeah. So if you're someone that's working towards something, needs to focus, um, I want to show you that it can be done. Yeah. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this study session. And this chapter is all about, what's this chapter about again? Hang on. This chapter is about financial statements. Yeah, that's it. Cash flow from operations total debt ratio. The cash flow from operations total debt ratio gauges a company's ability to repay the funds it has borrowed. Bank advances are short term and must normally be repaid or rolled over within a year. True. Dude, Beak, Beakasonics, welcome alive. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, just got binaural beats in on the laptop and just doing my chapter reading for the on financial statements right now for this course. Yeah, I do get distracted too, so I will be looking in the chat every now and again, but now I gotta focus. So I'll say my chapter aloud. Bank advances are short term and must normally be repaid over or rolled over within a year. Corporate debt issues commonly have sinking funds requiring annual cash outlays. A company's annual cash flow should therefore be adequate to meet those commitments. Before calculating this ratio, it is important to define cash flow from operations and consider its significance. Um, I have a tiny stake of crypto, but it's just so high risk. Not for me personally. Cash flow from operations, but I do like that it's an option though. Cash flow from operations equals the company's profit plus all deductions not requiring a cash outlay, such as depreciation, minus all additions not received in cash, such as share of profit of associates. Cash flow from operations divided by total debt ratio equals cash flow from operations divided by total debt outstanding, short term debt plus long term debt. XYZ company's cash flow from operations and total debt ratio is 0.33 to 1. Net earnings plus depreciation divided by 240,000. Yeah. So cash flow from operations frequently provides a broader picture of a company's earnings power than profit alone. Why? Some accounts are considered expenses and are deducted from earnings to get to profit, but do not incur any cash outflows. For example, depreciation is an expense that reduces profit, but no actual cash has been paid out for that account. Consequently, cash flow from operations is considered by some analysts a better indicator of the ability to repay debts and other liabilities like dividends. It is particularly useful in comparing companies within the same industry. It can reveal whether a company, even one that shows little to no profit after depreciation, can meet its debts. A relatively high ratio of cash flow to debt is considered positive. Conversely, a low ratio is negative. Analysts use minimum standards to assess debt repayment capacity and provide another perspective on debt evaluation. Analysts usually calculate the cash flow from operations to the total debt outstanding ratio for each of the last 5 fiscal years. An improving trend is desirable. A declining trend may indicate weakening financial strength unless the individual ratios for each year are well above the minimum standards. Interest coverage ratio. The interest coverage ratio reveals the ability of a company to pay the interest charges on its debt and indicates how well these charges are covered based upon earnings available to them. Available to pay them. Interest charges coverage or interest coverage indicates its margin of safety, since a company's failure to meet its interest charges could result in bankruptcy. All interest charges, including bank loans and short-term and long-term debt, must be taken into account to correctly assess interest coverage. Default on any one debt may impair the issuer's ability to meet its obligations to others and lead to default on other debts. Interest coverage is generally considered to be the most important quantitative test of risk when considering a debt security. A level of earnings well in excess of interest requirements is deemed necessary as a form of protection for possible adverse conditions in future years. Overall, the greater the coverage, the greater the margin of safety. To assess the adequacy of the coverage, it is common to set criteria. For example, an analyst may decide that an industrial company's annual interest requirements in each of the last 5 years should be covered at least 3 times by earnings available for interest payment in each year. At this level, the analyst would consider its debt securities to be of acceptable investment quality. A company may fail to meet these coverage standards without ever experiencing difficulties in fulfilling its debt obligations. However, if the securities of such a company are considered much higher risk because they lack an acceptable margin of safety, thus the interest coverage standards are only an indication of the likelihood that a company will be able to meet its interest obligations. It is also important to study the year-to-year trend in the interest coverage calculation. Ideally, a company should not only meet the industry standards for coverage in each of the last 5 or more years, but increase its coverage. A stable trend, which means that company is meeting the minimum standards, but not improving the ratio over the period, is also considered acceptable. However, a deteriorating trend suggests that further analysis is required to determine whether the company's financial position has seriously weakened. The formula for interest coverage is earnings before interest and taxes divided by total interest charges. XYZ's interest coverage is 6.25 times. XYZ company's interest coverage ratio is 6.25 times their earnings. So their earnings are 6.25 times their interest charges. Oh, Reuven, studying about my mutual funds course. I'm on the chapter about financial statements right now and different ratios to help determine if companies are financially healthy, to if they're worth investing in, or if they can invest and borrow money. Yeah, the calculation shows the interest charges for the year were covered 6.25 times by profit available to pay them. Stated another way, XYZ and $6.25 in profit, out of which to pay every dollar of interest. Operating performance ratio. The analysis of a company's profitability and efficiency tells the investor how well management is making use of the company's resources. In other words, these ratios analyze management performance. So this is operating performance. The gross profit margin ratio. Gross profit margin ratio, as well as the net profit margin ratio, is both useful for calculating internal trend lines and making comparisons with other companies, especially in industries such as food products and cosmetics, where turnover is high and competition is stiff. The gross margin is an indication of the efficiency of the management in turning over the company's goods at a profit. It shows the company's rate of profit after allowing for the cost of sales. So, gross profit margin ratio, revenue minus cost of sales divided by revenue. XYZ's gross profit ratio is 40%. Gross profit margin ratio, $1 million minus 600,000. Yeah, so the revenue of 1 million minus 600,000 cost of sales divided by revenue. Net profit margin is an important indicator of how efficiently the company is managed after taking both expenses and taxes into account. Because this ratio is the result of the company's operations for the period, it effectively sums up management's ability to run the business in a single figure. Net profit margin, profit divided by revenue. And hit that subscribe button if you like study with me like this. I'm going to be doing this every day in the morning instead of meditation, and I'll push meditation to the evening, along with the training. Okay. Net or after-tax return on common equity, return on equity ratio. Return of common equity represents the amount of profit returned as a percentage of shareholders' equity. Return of equity measures a company's profitability by revealing how much profit the company generates with the money shareholders have invested. The trend in the return on equity indicates management's effectiveness in maintaining or increasing the profitability in relation to the company's common equity capital. A declining trend suggests that operating efficiency is waning, although further quantitative analysis is needed to pinpoint the causes. For shareholders, a declining ratio shows that their investment is being employed less productively. The ratio is very important for common shareholders since it reflects the profitability of their capital in the business. Interesting. So you can use some of these ratios to see how much debt, how effectively the company pays off their debts. And if you're an investor and the company is publicly traded, you can use some of these ratios to tell whether our money that we've invested is going will help grow the company, or if it's used to service debt. Pretty interesting. It's very technical. So return on equity, we said, is profit divided by equity. Return on common equity is 22.9%. Yeah. Inventory turnover ratio measures the number of times a company's inventory is turned over in a year. It may be also expressed as a number of days required to achieve turnover. A high turnover is considered good. It means your goods are converted to sales, or your inventory is converted to sales quickly. A company with a high turnover requires a smaller investment in inventory than one producing the same sales with a low turnover. Inventory turnover ratio, cost of sales divided by inventory. Inventory turnover ratio is 10 times. 600,000 divided by, so cost of sales divided by inventory, 60,000. Over the course of 365-day year, turned over inventory 365 days divided by 10, or once every 36 and a half days. To be meaningful, the inventory turnover ratio should be calculated using the cost of sales. If this information is not shown separately, the revenue figure may have to be used. This ratio indicates management's efficiency in turning over the company's inventory and can be used to compare one company with others in the same field. It also provides an indication of the adequacy of a company's inventory for the volume of the business being handled. If a company has an inventory turnover rate that is higher than its industry, it generally indicates a better balance between the inventory and sales volume. The company is unlikely to be caught with too much inventory if the price of raw materials drops or if the market demand for its product falls. There should also be less wastage because materials and products are not standing unused for long periods and deteriorating quality and marketability. Nice. We got 4 more pages, Mindset fam. 1 sec. Okay. hmm On the other hand, if inventory turnover is too high in relation to industry norms, the company may have problems with shortage of inventory, resulting in loss of sales. If a company has a low rate of inventory turnover, it may be because the inventory contains an unusually large number of unsaleable goods, the company is holding excess inventory, or the value of the inventory has been overstated. Since a large part of a company's working capital is sometimes tied up in inventory, the way in which the inventory's position is managed directly affects earnings and the rate of return earned from the employment of the company's capital in the business. Technology these days, I'm amazed how these phones can even pay at stores with one display. I know, it's crazy. It's in and technology has, its pros and cons. Um, but the fact that we can literally pay something from our phone and get paid also on our phone is crazy. And you can check your sales as a business, right? Like how much your goods cost you. You can literally run a business from your phone too. This is crazy how far things have come. Where was I here? Yeah, value ratios. This is also, you'll find this in the financial statements of like publicly traded companies too, like all these ratios to see if that company that you're investing in as a shareholder is, you can use these ratios to determine it's a technical way to invest your money. I haven't done it myself, but I want to learn more about it and use these ratios more in the future, maybe. Uh, Ratios in this group sometimes are called market ratios. They measure the way the stock market, they measure the way the stock market rates a company by comparing the market price of its shares to information in its financial statements. Price alone does not tell analysts much about a company unless there's a common way to relate the price to dividends and earnings. Value ratios do this. Earnings per common share ratio. In common stock analysis, great emphasis is placed on earnings per common share. This ratio shows the earnings available to each common share and is an important element in judging an appropriate market price for buying or selling common stock. A rising trend in earnings per share has favorable implications for the price of a stock. So, earnings per common share ratio is profit divided by number of shares outstanding, number of common shares outstanding. Absolutely. Appreciate it. XYZ's earnings per common share are 55 cents per share. So 55,000 in profit divided by 100,000 shares outstanding. Because of the importance of the earnings per share, analysts pay close attention to possible dilution of the stock's value caused by the conversion of outstanding convertible securities, the exercise of warrants, shares issued under employee stock options, and other changes. Fully diluted earnings per share can be calculated on common stock outstanding plus common stock equivalents, such as convertible preferred stock, convertible debentures, stock options, under employee stock option plans, and warrants. This figure shows the dilution in earnings per share that would occur if all equivalent securities were converted into common shares. Are we at for time here? Okay, good. Got another half an hour, Mindset fam. Yeah. Here we go. So fully diluted earnings per share can be calculated on common stock outstanding plus common stock equivalents such as convertible preferred stock, convertible debentures, stock options under employee stock option plans, and warrants. This figure shows the dilution in earnings per share that would occur if all equivalent securities were converted into common shares. Earnings from operations after all prior claims have been met belong to the common shareholders. Yeah. So that means, again, creditors are paid first, then common shareholders. Creditors like your bankers, right? Any loans that you have, anything that's finance with the company, equipment. The shareholders, therefore, will want to know how much has been earned on their shares. If profit is high, directors may declare and pay out a good portion as dividends. Even in growth companies, directors may decide to make at least a token payment because they realize that most shareholders like to feel some of the profits are flowing into their pockets. On the other hand, if profits are low or the company has suffered a loss, they may not pay dividends on the common shares. Here we go. A couple more pages. Dividend yield. Common and preferred shares may pay dividends. The yield on common and preferred shares or common and preferred stocks is the annual dividend rate expressed as a percentage of the current market price of the stock. It represents the investor's return on the investment. Dividend yield equals annual dividend per share divided by current market price. Price earnings ratio, or PE multiple ratio. Yeah, the price per earnings ratio, or PE ratio, is probably the most widely employed of all financial ratios because it combines all the other ratios into one figure, profits to earnings. Compares the company's current share price to its earnings per share. Price per earnings ratio equals current price of common shares divided by earnings per share. Assuming that the current market price of XYZ common stock is $5 and that its earnings per common share is 55 cents, the PE ratio is $5 divided by 55 cents, or 9.1. The main reason for calculating earnings per share. For calculating earnings per common share, apart from indicating dividend protection, is to make a comparison with the share's market price. The PE ratio expresses this comparison in one convenient figure, showing that a share is selling at so many times its actual or anticipated annual earnings. At a price of $5, XYZ common shares are selling at 9.1 times its in the company earnings. P ratios enable the shares of one company to be compared with those of another. Example, Company A, earnings per share is $2, price $20. Company B, so again, it's, yeah. And then Company B, earnings per share $1, price $10. So the PE ratio of Company A is 20 divided by 2 is 10. And then it's the same for Company B. Though earnings per share of Company A are twice of Company B, the shares of each company represent equivalent value because Company A shares at $20 each cost twice as much as Company B shares. In other words, both companies are selling at 10 times their earnings. The elements that determine the quality of an issue and therefore are represented in the PE ratio include tangible factors combined or contained in financial data, which can be expressed in ratios relating to liquidity, earnings trends, profitability, dividend payout, and financial strength. Statement of financial position ratios. Intangible factors, such as quality of management, nature and prospects for the industry in which the issuing company operates, its competitive position, and its individual prospects. All these factors are taken into account when investors and speculators collectively decide what price a share is worth. To compare the PE ratio for one company's common shares with that of another, the companies should usually be in the same industry. PE ratios for various industries are available from different sources. In practice, however, most investment analysts and companies make their own projections of a company's earnings for the next 12-month period. and calculate PE ratios on these projected figures in relation to the stock's current market price. Because of the many variables involved in forecasting earnings, the use of estimates and calculations should be approached with great caution. What? You think that? I have no idea what you're talking about. mm, yeah, here we go. The PE ratio helps analysts to determine a reasonable value for a common stock at any time in the market cycle. By calculating a company's PE ratio over a number of years, the analyst will find considerable fluctuation with high and low points. If the highs and lows of a particular stock's PE ratio remain constant over several stock market cycles, they indicate selling and buying points for the stock. The study of the PE ratios of competitor companies and that of the relevant market subgroup index also helps to provide a perspective. The PE ratio comparison assists in the selection process. Example, two companies of equal stature in the same industry and both have similar prospects but different PE ratios. The company with the lower PE ratio is usually the better buy. As a rule, PE ratios increase in a rising stock market or with rising earnings. The reverse is true in a declining market or when earnings decline. Since the PE ratio is an indicator of an investor confidence, its highs and lows may vary from market cycle to market cycle. Much depends on changes in investor enthusiasm for a company or an industry over several years. Some investors consider the PE ratio as a timing device for stock transactions, but it should not be relied on exclusively and should only be used in conjunction with other criteria. The PE ratio approach to stock selection assumes that an investor should buy a stock if its PE ratio is close to low of its historical range and sell when it's near its highest point. Now I got a case study. All right. Case study: the value of advice using market ratios to add value for investors. Jerry is meeting with a client and to discuss investing new money into her existing non-registered investment portfolio. As a balanced growth investor with a long-term investment time horizon, Anne is hoping that Jerry can recommend a mutual fund that is focused on stable growth and for tax planning purposes, one that produces minimal but tax-effective income. After reaffirming Anne's goals and investment profile, Jerry recommends to Anne a blue chip equity fund, one that uses value investing approach. Jerry explains that using a value investing approach can help reduce taxable short-term capital gains distributions as the fund manager takes a long-term buy and hold approach to investing, reducing short-term investment turnover. Holding blue chip equities often means that these companies pay dividends, and the fund Jerry recommends to M does have a dividend yield of around 3%. However, with capital appreciation, few capital gains distributions, and dividend income eligible for tax credits, the fund meets Ann's investment goals nicely. And a knowledgeable investor is interested in how a value style fund manager analyzes companies to identify opportunities. Jerry explains that these fund managers will often use value or market ratios to look for stocks that, based on their analysis, the market is undervaluing relative to their industry peers. They often do this by determining the company's earnings per share ratio and whether it's rising or falling. If a company's earnings are consistently rising, then it is likely that it is well managed and well positioned in its industry to continue to produce solid earnings growth. Calculating the dividend yield to determine if a company's stock is over or underpriced. Yields that are too high can suggest that the current price of a stock is too low relative to what the company pays out to investors. This can indicate that investors are undervaluing the stock's price given the dividend cash flow per share. Examining the price to earnings ratio to determine whether investors are over or undervaluing this company's stock. A high PE ratio often indicates that the investors are paying too much for a company's future earnings relative to the other company's stocks, while a low PE ratio relative to its industry peers can suggest that the company is out of favor with investors, representing a possible opportunity for a fund manager to buy it cheaply and wait for other investors to realize the same thing. Here we go. Trend analysis. Ratios calculated from a company's financial statements are for only 1 year have limited value. They become meaningful when compared with other ratios, either internally, the series of similar ratios of the same company over a period, or externally, with comparable ratios of similar companies or with industry averages. Analysts identify trends by selecting a base date or a period, treating the figure or ratio for the period as 100, and then dividing it into the comparable ratios for subsequent periods. Figure 9.1 shows this calculation for a typical pulp and paper company. Earnings per share, year 1 to year 5. The above example uses year 1 as the base year. Their earnings per share for that year, $1.18 per share, is treated as equivalent to 100. The trend ratios for subsequent years are calculated by dividing 1.18 into the earnings per share ratio for each subsequent year. A similar trend line over the same period for pulp and paper company B is shown. The trend ratio calculations are useful because they clearly show changes. Company A shows a steady earnings per share growth during the period, while company B shows a decline. Trend ratios calculations are useful because they clearly show changes. Yeah. Company A shows a steady earnings per share, while company B shows decline. While it is not always the case, these trends can help analysts for future. Yeah, just doing my last little bit of reading there. Say you. All right, I'll just read this last part and then the chapter's done, and then we're good for the morning. Evaluating a company should be made within the content of overall industry performance. And then they're just basically saying to end this chapter, you want to compare apples to apples, like company, like a brewery or like don't compare like two different companies' financials using the ratios. You always want to make sure if it's a pulp and paper company, analyze and compare another pulp and paper company. For example, a company being analyzed may have a ratio that gives it a relatively standing above all others in the industry, but due to a recession, all companies within the industry may be below historical industry operating norms. To be thorough, an analyst must compare the company to both the current average of the industry as well as the historical industry standard. So there, chapter 9 is done. Mindset fam. Nice. And then they give financial statement examples for when I do my quizzes. So I'm going to do my quiz tonight. Chapter 10. So then our next chapters that we're on, next section, 10 to 13. So I'll be doing my reading for that probably tomorrow morning. So stay tuned for the next section. Chapter 10 is understanding mutual funds and managed products. And then, so there's the modern mutual fund, conservative mutual fund products, riskier mutual fund products, and alternative managed products. So it's going to be getting into the weeds of different types of mutual funds based on clients' risk tolerance, etc. So it's going to get interesting. It gets more specific. So we've got 8 more chapters: 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Yeah. So stay tuned, Mindset Fam. I'll do another study session tomorrow morning, probably around 7:15, 7:30 a.m. Pacific. All right, peace. I'll see you guys at lunchtime for lunchtime live. Yay, what's going on, Rohit? I'll be doing another study session tomorrow morning and a lunchtime live, so you guys can see what I eat for lunch at probably, yeah, I'll be home by like 12:45 p.m. Pacific. So stay tuned. Have a great day, Mindset Fam. Happy Monday.